Hey, Ross.
Hi.
A lot to talk about today, Ross.
Excellent. I'm ready.
You better be ready. You better be ready. Blow your nose, Ross. Your nose is full of snot. So the game plan today on the Ross and Dan hour, the war in Ukraine. I'm gonna grill you. Are you ready?
I'm ready. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
How are you really?
Oh, I feel like shit. Yeah, trash.
Well, I hope you feel better.
Thank you. No, I'm fine. I was just doing a bit. I'm doing great, homie. I feel like I got some direction, and that's what I like when I'm making content. I like having a direction. I like knowing where I'm going. I like, having a purpose.
Excellent. Yeah, feeling like you have purpose and direction and a sense of movement and deliberateness is definitely validating.
Well, you little commie.
You want to talk Ukraine?
Yeah, lay it on me.
What was Ukraine like? What was the material reality of Ukraine in 2014? Why don't we start there?
Well, Ukraine was a very divided country in 2014. It did have a popularly elected leader who was, put in a tough place given that he had to balance what's the interests of the Ukrainian people with the influence and force of Russia, who had been a traditional trading partner, and with all the historical and ethnic and sort of fraternal ties that those two countries have had, and Ukraine's dealings with the EU, which had largely been in the nature of neoliberal exploitative loans through the IMF. Traditionally, Ukraine had been considered the most corrupt country in Europe. So there was quite a bit of investment in Ukraine that was shady. There was a lot of power, major powers, kind of at work to garner influence over that country. It has historically been a kind of a hinge point for what's considered control of the Eurasian continent. So it has been a point of contention for a very long time. So with that being the case in 2014, the then president had pulled out of an EU deal in favor of I believe, a more beneficial deal with Russia, which was not necessarily appreciated by the more EU-minded Ukrainian nationalists that largely inhabited the western part of the country. So there was a series of protests that were organic. Those were the Maidan protests. They were co-opted, and the violent part of them was largely these right-wing ultranationalist elements who had largely been utilized as enforcers for different sort of local powers, and had been integrated into regional defenses, the police force. And so there was the Odessa trade union fire.
Okay.
There was a series of violent actions. There was the issue with the snipers in Maidan, and some question as to who they were and who ordered them to fire on the protesters. Ultimately, what I think is with U.S. support, the regime was toppled, and and I'm drawing a blank on his name, Yanukovych?
I think so.
was more or less run out of the country, fearing for his life. Following that, there was an interim government put in place, and there was an election which gave Ukraine Zelensky, who had been elected on a like a peace reconciliation platform.
You wanted peace in Donbass.
Yeah. Following the Maidan Revolution or coup, depending on how you feel about it.
It was a riot, dude. It was not funny.
Ukraine had started attacking its own citizens in the Donbass. Also, Russia moved some of its military into Crimea, basically seizing it. Illegal annexation. Thank you, Poroshenko was the the interim president. Russia took Crimea. They began to basically do pretty minor support for the people in Donbass, in the same way that the U.S. does support for like the Turkish Grey Wolves, you know. Yes, Russia was giving them weapons and some financial support and probably training and logistics. Likely there were even Russians on the ground doing, military stuff in Donbass at some point. From what I've read, the people in Donbass, the sort of regional government that had formed there, that wanted its own independence, had been calling for greater levels of intervention on their behalf by Russia, and Putin understanding that like this is a bait and bleed project by NATO, was resistant to get involved, understandably, and to commit to what would be a much larger conflict that Russia is going to win, but will be painful.
Bait and bleed. This is new to me. It's a Mearsheimer thing, huh? A realist, international relations, IR, realism here, huh?
Yeah.
Real quick, what is it? Yeah.
The idea is that you bait something into your trap, and the trap is developed in such a way that as you struggle or fight, it damages you more and you bleed out. If you're doing it in the sense of a proxy war, the thing that they're thrashing against in this instance is Ukraine is the bait, or well, Donbass was the bait, Ukraine is the trap, and Russia was the target. Russia in thrashing against Ukraine, and Ukraine, fighting for its independence to some extent. There is like there is a right-wing ultranationalist segment within Ukraine that is very problematic and was driving a lot of the violence and the policies that drove that. I think average Ukrainian doesn't want war, but would like Russia to stop shooting at them too, So I can't say Ukrainians lay down your arms, because that's the situation they're in, Regardless, Ukraine, in defending itself, is also harming Russia. So, and Ukraine and Russia are both bleeding out. Ukraine faster than Russia, which is neither here nor there for American empire, unfortunately.
Okay, so this brings me to a question which I'm having to try to figure out, which is, how is history going to look back on this in terms of how will history remember this war and those responsible for bringing this war to fruition? How will history remember that versus the reality of that? You know, the people who actually made this happen, the people who are making this war happen and continue to happen. How will history remember, you know, this versus the reality of it?
Well, how does history remember the winning of World War II?
The United States won. We came in and we're good people and we just got a great flag and America, fuck yeah! You know, stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
No?
We already have the set narrative that Russia's bad. Putin bad. Ukraine.
Well, hold on. Who finish that thought? How did World War II end? Who won?
Who won?
Yeah.
Capitalism.
We all lost, yeah.
Yeah.
Capitalism won, but who beat the Nazis?
Oh, the Soviets.
There you go. Sorry, thank you. History.
Because of the way that history is written. I mean, dismantling and consuming Russia has been part of the sort of global capitalist project since the 1918 revolution. U.S. sort of capital hegemony wants to consume Russia and its natural resources and exploit it the way it's exploited much of the rest of the world. And it can't do that because at one point, you know, there was the USSR, which was directly countering those efforts at exploitation. But that was replaced by sort of Russia's internal capitalists who then exploited a post-Soviet Russia, while at the same time Russia being opened up for exploitation by the greater capitalist sphere, Europe and the United States. So this, I suspect, if Americans get to keep writing the history books, this will be, you know, Russia's bad and was aggressive and they seized territory and, you know, got away with it.
So how much responsibility does the West have in, you know, leading Ukrainians down the primrose path, as Mearsheimer says?
I mean, I think that the United States bears responsibility for the conditions that resulted in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Had we not helped coup the Yanukovych presidency, had we not supported the most radical, violent nationalists and supported them, armed them, trained them, had we not done quite a few things, I suspect Russia's security fears wouldn't have been quite as high. We laugh at the idea that Russia is afraid, but Russia has a right to be concerned. The United States is trying to break it apart and consume it so that we can exploit its people and take its resources and leave it, you know, an ecological disaster with the people poor and, you know, deprived of basic living needs, you know. I would be terrified of us too. If you're not paying attention. We're fucking scary.
Is it unfair to say, or a reductionist to say, that the West's constant escalation, continuing to this day, which is continuing to this day, is what led Russia to invade Ukraine?
I think that absolutely informed the decision making that led into Putin ordering the invasion. I can't see how it's not a factor. The expansion of NATO, the coup, the support through Turkey and NATO proxies, helping to train Ukraine, and also the United States' actions throughout this conflict, to include, you know, the bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline, the potentially American involvement in the attack on the bridge to Crimea. Presumably, you could say the deployment of the HIMARS weapon systems could be considered an escalation.
I would agree. You passed the test. Okay. Great.
The CIA will come pick me up any second now.
Yeah. Yeah. So currently Biden, if I can try to pull up the story real quick, Biden's asking for $37.7 billion more arms and aid to go to Ukraine. I don't think this has yet been completed or what, but White House requests $37.7 billion. $37.7 billion in new Ukraine funding. $10 billion for COVID relief, by the way. But yeah, so there's
I mean, that's fine. COVID's good. Or well, COVID's bad. Fighting COVID's good.
True, yeah. So,
what are they?
Is this an escalation?
I mean, I think so.
Yeah.
But what I'm just interested. What are they sending?
Okay.
Because it's like they don't like just wire cash. It's we're sending you X number of dollars in tanks or X number of dollars in.
Let's figure that out. $21.7 billion for defense purposes like equipment, military support. $14.5 billion in direct funding.
Just cash.
Just straight up cash. Just the equivalent. The idea is, they don't literally send suitcases of cash, but you can imagine suitcases of cash. And that's how much cash that you don't have in your fucking pockets. In fact, literally, they're taking it out of our pockets. It's our taxes. And or they're printing money.
Right. Yeah.
Which goes to show that they could print money if it came to if it came to, I don't know, medical care for people like you and me. What do you think about that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Easily. And in fact, they wouldn't even have to print the money to do it.
Wait.
If they just if they nationalize the service, they could issue like tickets, because money is just a method of accounting.
That's an idea.
So if the service is basically a zero sum because it's all gets washed out because it's the government, you can just use a stupid ticket,
Yeah. Or they could just print money like they're doing for Ukrainian healthcare. $900 million. They're just printing out money for Ukrainians' healthcare. Why don't they just print money for us for our healthcare? You know what I mean? I was like
inflation.
sick the other day and I couldn't go to the doctor because I was like, I couldn't afford it. How about that? That's just fucked up, dude.
Inflation, they would print more money for you and Americans and stuff and the stuff that they need, but they can't because inflation. And because of inflation, what the Fed is trying to do is what will, in effect, raise the unemployment rate. Yeah, so something that the Fed's trying to do is they're changing the interest rates that people can borrow for. And if it's more expensive to borrow, then businesses are less likely to expand. They're less likely to retain staff. They're going to start cutting expenses. And that means that people don't get hired or maybe get fired to tighten their belts. And that in turn hurts the purchasing power of Americans, and that drives down inflation.
There you go.
Or, bear with me here.
Yeah.
You could look to where the vast majority of the cash is sitting, because, if the issue is inflation and the bulk of the cash is over here in the finance sector, well, we could just get a fist of that, and take it out, and the inflation would immediately go down. So I don't know why we're trying to bleed the average worker for pennies when we can just go to Wall Street and get dollars.
Yeah. Our dollars. They stole it from us. Ross, what does it mean for peace prospects in Ukraine knowing that the White House is requesting more funding for arms going to Ukraine? What does it mean for peace in Ukraine?
Honestly, I think that peace isn't that far away.
Yeah.
I don't think that. I don't think Ukraine will be able to keep the war up very much longer in a sufficient way. They don't have a lot of time left. They're running out of people, and they're running out of weapon systems that actually make a difference. That Russia isn't using its air force to bomb the shit out of things is like, you understand that Russia hasn't done everything yet.
Yeah.
Like their gloves are on still. If you look at the way that the United States, the way that we conduct war,
Yeah.
we would have just carpet bombed Kyiv.
So you're saying Russia's a bit restrained compared to what it could do?
I'm saying that Russia has not fully committed the entirety of its military forces, and basically, like, Russia could send its pilots on what would be, to some extent, suicide missions, because Ukraine does have anti-air missile systems. They're severely degraded because of the missile strikes, because of the attacks on the electrical system, because the expended ammunition supplies, so they're not able to get the missiles to rearm the anti-air launchers because they've been using them against the incoming rocket barrages. So Russia could just start using its air force. The problem with that is bombs, blow up civilians, which is why they've restrained themselves, as hard as that is to say, because civilians are dying, military people are dying and being wounded. But this is a restrained war, which is scary.
Yeah.
Because what that also means is that if Russia wanted to just okay, we're done now, they could do that.
Compared to how the U.S. bombs.
Right.
Just fucking willy ass nilly. They'll bomb the fuck out of the entire country. In fact, that's often the design. That's often the goal. They're going to be like, oh, so sorry. Some of our bombs,
we accidentally, blew up this dam to destroy, people's access to water in this entire region. But the dam was also a military target because they drive across it.
Okay, so let's talk about bombing of infrastructure. Sort of like a campaign of Russian bombing to take out Ukrainian energy infrastructure, for instance.
Yeah.
Leading into, we're in December here. It's going to be winter there. Fucking cold as shit. What is going on here? Is Russia trying to bring Ukraine to its knees, trying to end this war here, trying to get Ukraine to some peace talks by bringing them to their knees? People are going to be cold this winter.
If you consider a castle under siege, largely in this instance, it is cut off from support. Like, its major way of getting support is Poland. So if we assume a castle under siege, but maybe they have a neighbor that is able to get them stuff, it's a bottleneck on assets. And by tightening the Ukraine's access to basic living needs, things like heat, things like water, things like food. So to remove the sentimentality of, we're talking about humans, we're talking about children, we're talking about people that are civilians that don't want anything to do with this. Tactically, they're a liability because you have to feed them. You have to, if they're hurt, you have to give them care. You have to, if they're spread out, you're going to have to bring them in, and because it's too hard to get resources to people in disparate areas. because the railway systems that had previously been powered on electricity are now being powered largely by diesel trains. So it's forcing the Ukrainians to consolidate into the population centers, but then the population centers bear their own challenges. Is Russia weaponizing winter? I suppose, in the sense that it's going to be cold, and the way that people heat themselves is like oil and electricity, and Russia's stopping them from having that. Yeah. I mean, that's siege warfare. I don't know what you, no offense, but that's what that is. You know, if you don't move the civilians out of the impacted area, the war is, they're impacted by the war. That's why you want to like move the civilians out of the path of the war. You want to move the civilians out of the populated areas because war's bad. And it's not supposed to, you're not supposed to be in and amongst the civilians hiding. You're not supposed to use them as a shield, you know. The whole point of fighting, you know, of having the military is that the war doesn't come to the civilians, your civilians at least. You can't be confused by like Warner Brothers and Viacom and Paramount. Like individual military people have morals, principles, and can be good people. But big picture, the military is a machine, and it does what it's supposed to do, which is to like kill people and destroy things. And that's what the military is doing. You can't fight wars morally. War is immoral. You know, you can justify, you know, committing violence against someone. You know, if I see somebody being attacked, I can intervene. And, you know, if in intervening, I severely hurt the person who was, you know, attacking somebody. I could feel guilty about that, but I would justify it by saying I was intervening, saving somebody's life, you know? But that's not what the military is about. The United States doesn't intervene for the good reasons that we tell ourselves in our media, in our movies, in our TV shows. We're there because there's capital interests involved. We're there because there is something that we want for ourselves or something that we want to deny others. And people just aren't a part of that arithmetic.
Let's talk these new sanctions, Russian oil sanctions here. Yeah. So the idea is the G7, the group of seven, the gang of seven, ganging up on Russia, trying to tell them the price that they have to sell their oil at, and they're capping it at $60 a barrel, and they're trying to get a bunch of people, a bunch of, you know, countries together to, you know, have a sort of united front and say, you know what, you can't sell us oil unless it's this price. It's sort of it's sort of a way for, I don't know, like Western capital to, you know, denationalize Russia's oil. That takes away Russia's sovereignty to choose what to do with their oil.
Well, what they're trying to do is create a buying cartel. Where you could say that OPEC is a, you know, like an oil producing and selling nation cartel. America with the G7 is trying to create a buying cartel of, you know, what are the aligned largest industrialized economies. Interestingly, the G7 doesn't have China.
I think correct.
Huh. China's a big economy.
Yeah, it's on the up and up.
On the up and up. It was growing, I think.
What is likely to happen here? What are the effects of this? I mean, what's going to happen?
What I suspect will happen is Russia will continue to sell oil, probably to Turkey, China, Indian or India, Qatar, and some of its other like aligned ally nations. From what I understand, OPEC is talking about reducing its oil production because to some extent, like if the G7 can say, well, we're not going to buy oil from Russia for more than X dollars a barrel, well, can't they also do that to OPEC? And that's, like their
They're
source
giving away the
of
game, yeah.
power. So OPEC's like, hey, we'll just cut production too. Screw you guys. Like, we can apply pressure, So I suspect that Russia will be fine. Yes, their economy is hurting, not as bad as we are presenting it, in part because like they're in control of their own economy and they have a state like structure that's able to be like, we're going to nationalize things because of the needs of the nation. And so oligarchs fucking shut up. I'm going to need you to shut up for a bit or you're going to fall out of a window. Okay.
No sympathy for oligarchs on the Ida and Simpson show with Ida and Simpson.
Whereas in the United States, like, you can't get a politician to do nothing against the interests of the rich. So there's that. Ultimately, I think that what's happening now in Ukraine is a resolution of the battle lines. And once that's set, there will be an attempt at negotiations. If those negotiations don't or if those negotiations don't work out, we may see a Russian invasion, more in the nature of the initial push towards Kyiv. But I suspect that we'll be seeing a negotiated peace, probably with the Donbass, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and probably some amount of the Kherson region retaining its independence or alliance with the Russian Federation, or however they end up orienting their governments and relationships. I suspect that's probably not too far from what it'll end up looking like. Russia has stopped all the advances, and it looks to be as though they are gradually regaining territory that they had lost, especially around Bakhmut.
Where's Bakhmut?
That's in the northern, more north. I think there's two red, right about where those two red dots are, I think. Russia pretty much has the entire area around it targeted with artillery. So Ukraine is struggling to resource their troops in that region. That's where they're having all the trenches dug. So it's sort of reminiscent of World War I. What Russia's tactic in that region has been a bit of like basically they will expand with a small push. And then once they've sort of expanded and captured that territory, then they'll reinforce into that territory. So they sort of, if you imagine like a really tight sweater and like you inhale and it stretches the material and you can relax and it sort of stays stretched, So then if you do fill in that space, it's not as restrictive. They're sort of employing a similar tactic in the region where they're using that an initial push to push the Ukrainian forces out of a region and then basically heavily reinforcing and then using that as their next location to then push. So it's a very deliberate crawl. It is a tactic that you use when you have superiority of resources, numbers, and munitions. It's a signal that the war has sort of ground to a point where there's a tendency or a motion or a potential. The conflict is sort of tending in a direction, and that direction is that Ukraine is going to have to either come to the negotiating table, ceding territory, or Russia will have a larger offensive either later this winter or in the spring. And it wouldn't matter what we send them, is the thing. We can't give them enough tanks because they're not trained on them, and they don't have the logistics supply lines nor the bases to maintain them or protect them from damage. And if they're damaged, you got to send them all the way back to Poland. So we can't just send them tanks, and we can't just send them more HIMARS missiles because we're running out. And we want to make sure that we have some in our stock in case we have to use them for ourselves. Those take time to produce. So if we want to have the whatever facilities ramp up production, that takes time because those facilities have to source all the little components that go into making the missiles, including the fabrication of individual pieces and welding. And so, one of these missiles might take a week or two to build and assemble. And then the HIMARS shoots 6 or 8 of them. So now you got to build however many. And then are we going to fly them to Poland? Are we going to put them on a boat? If we're putting them on a boat, that's going to take a while to get to Europe, get offloaded, and then get to the front line. If we fly them to Ukraine, well, now we're limited on how many we can ship at a time because aircraft are only so big. So if the HIMARS, the rounds, if those production facilities are in the United States, even if they ramp up production, it still takes weeks, months before those things ever see the front line. All of that being said, the issue with the HIMARS is every time one is taken out of commission or damaged, it has to go back to Poland to get repaired. Because if they have repair facilities in Ukraine, they're targetable, they're going to get blown up. The same reason that Ukraine can't have air bases, which is part of the reason why we can't give them squadrons of aircraft that they're not trained on, don't have the maintenance facilities for, don't have the runways for to maintain. They don't have hangars to do the repairs needed. They don't have the logistics and supply chains. Ukraine is not in a winning position. And unfortunately, all that's left is people dying. And Ukrainians don't have as many people. So that's just, unless there is a intervention in a major way that changes the tides of war, this thing's kind of said and done.
Any kind of an intervention that would turn the tide of a war would be bloody as fuck.
Yeah. I mean, short of a world war, this is done.
Here's the thing, though. Today, news coming out, Russian air bases, one named Engels, I guess after Comrade Engels, and the another one in Diaghilevo in Ryazan province or something. Ryazan Oblast, I think.
I think my computer processors are rising.
Yeah, same. I got the 7. Yeah, it's a 3800 Ryzen. Oh, I guess that's where they make it. So I guess they were hit by some drones today, and Russia came out with a statement saying that it was Soviet era Ukrainian-made drones, these really old ones, these 2U-141s that used to be reconnaissance
like a big glider,
drones.
right?
It looks like a what?
A big glider?
A big glider, yeah. Let me see if I can find it.
With a jet engine on it?
It looks old as fuck, dude. You're like, you can't believe they're flying them. This is an old Russian-made one, though. I think the one that they made is a little bit more updated, but still. And I think they put a bomb on it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
If you look at the what the Nazis were using, their V2 rockets.
I will. How about that one, huh? Vergeltungswaffe. Retaliation weapon. My gosh. The world's first long-range guided ballistic missile.
So,
sort of looks like NASA rockets. Looks like NASA rockets. I don't know why that is.
Weird.
There's got to be a reason. But I was trying to figure out, whether it was the new Ukrobanoprom. They successfully tested a long-range drone. They say 1,000 kilometers, which puts that in range of Moscow, homie. But they're still testing it for actual use.
That would, if Ukraine starts targeting places within Russia, that would probably.
Did you say starts?
More aggressively.
More aggressively. Okay, fair enough.
Like there's these 1 or 2 strikes that have happened.
Dozens. Ukrainian drones are widely thought to be behind dozens of attacks on facilities used to supply Putin's armies located in Russia's western border regions. I just learned this today.
So dozens.
So that would explain why we've never talked about that.
Yeah, that would be considered an escalation.
It was said the Ryazan attack at the very least was said to have launched from inside Ukraine, and I think they say there are questions about the Engels one, but the Engels Air Force Base is just as far from the Ukrainian border as the Ryazan one, and I'm going to be honest, Moscow is roughly the same distance. So is this not them sending a message or something? Like saying, hey, we could hit Moscow if we really want to.
What size are these new drones, or how big are they? Do we have any?
So first of all, one of these Ukrainian drones, these 141s, landed in Croatia. Do you remember this story? We were learning about this before you popped on. This Ukrainian Tupolev 141. I guess it looks something like this, if that helps you understand. Pretty fat ass, big ass drone, right? It was initially a surveillance drone. This thing, in March, one of them launched from Ukraine. I think they were trying to attack Russian positions, but it went in the exact wrong direction, and it landed 550 kilometers away in Croatia.
It was windy.
It was windy that day. And they said, Ukraine's like, nope, that's not ours. But of course it was theirs. It was absolutely theirs. And then it's been said, and Russia said today, they came out with a statement saying that this is what Ukraine used to hit their positions in Engels and Ryazan.
So the questions I would ask are, how many of those do they have? And can they produce them?
I got to believe they don't have that many of them. They're probably using them on choice targets. Just like the 11, up to 2,000 Switchblade type drones that the United States has sent to Ukraine up until now, that we're aware of. They sent 1,100 of those Switchblade type drones back in November, like a month ago. In fact, they're probably still arriving. You know what I mean?
Right. So part of this, I think, to me, signals that because they're having to get creative with their resources, they're running out of the obvious choices to give them. They're pulling old stuff out of mothballs and repurposing it because they don't have the new stock. Yeah. But it's smart, tactically, strategically, or whatever, taking these old surveillance drones or whatever and packing them full of explosives and, launching them in a general direction. I don't know the degree of guidance they have, but it seems like a general area, unless it's Croatia.
Poor Croatia.
Great. They have access to a drone. How many do they have? Will it have a measurable impact on the war? If they have 100 and they can carry out, mass terror attack, bombings against Moscow as a way to send a message. You've sent a message, and how do you think Putin's going to respond?
Be pissed.
So there's like carrying out, sort of these violent acts of retaliation, as opposed to, using these assets strategically to strike probably air bases or supply depots, things like that. Perhaps the some of the strikes that were happening near Crimea, southeast of the Kinburn Spit, may have been related to some of these surveillance drones, suicide surveillance drones.
Yeah.
These kamikaze Ukrainian
suicide drones.
suicide drones.
At the very least, they're using that terminology for both sides, so you got to hand it to them.
I cannot believe that the Ukrainians would use suicide drones.
Do we expect Russia to retaliate or anything like that? Or just are they just going to carry on doing their war?
I think they'll carry on doing the war.
Yeah.
So you could presumably, and I would double check myself on this. It was reported that there was an uptick of attacks after the bridge to Crimea had been attacked. That there had been increased rocket attacks for a couple of days after that. That might be evidence of, sort of a retaliatory attack on this sort of action. I suspect that Russia would be more interested in neutralizing the threat as opposed to reactively lashing out about their use of it.
So, if I think I agree, and who knows, we'll see, right? But what about the West? Because this represents an escalation, I believe, on the West. Now, we did mention that Ukraine has hit, like we mentioned, I learned today, they hit dozens of positions behind Russian lines using these drones. That makes sense now that I know that the Ukrainians have gotten their hands on thousands of these drones, like 2,000. So I believe it represents an escalation of the West. What's next? Like, how is the West going to escalate next? What are they going to do next? What kind of shit can we imagine? Because I think they're just going to keep doing this thing until eventually they're actually hitting Moscow. Or is that? Do you think they're not going to hit Moscow eventually?
My understanding is that the United States has had some issues with the somewhat flagrant use of the HIMARS by the Ukrainian forces thus far, and the signal that attacks within Russia sends in terms of escalation. So I think that the United States there's hardliners within the United States who want the war to continue to go. I don't think that they're winning out in the overall conversation. I think people are looking for an exit ramp.
I hope so.
France, the United States, I think Germany would all prefer an exit ramp. I think the UK is unfortunately like doing its own thing right now, trying to figure itself out. It's having a moment.
Identity crisis over there, yeah.
But there aren't weapon systems. There aren't tools and assets that we have in our system or like have in our that we can give them that's going to make a difference. We can't give them helicopters. We can't give them planes. We can't give them tanks in quantities that matter. We can't give them howitzer rounds or replacements for the HIMARS. They're running out of missiles for their anti-air systems. They're afraid to turn on their radar because then it's targetable by Russian anti-radiation, or basically the missiles are designed to hone in on electromagnetic radiation that's emitted by the radar thing. So one of the things that you may remember, there was news reporting of Russia shooting old missiles that had been designed for MIRVs, multiple reentry.
Multiple independently targetable reentry vehicle. I got it.
Thank you. And basically they removed the weapon package and replaced it with like weight.
Yeah.
So what they were doing is they were using them as duds,
Oh.
so that you flush the the airspace with missiles.
Hey guys.
And forces the Ukrainians to turn on their radar to figure out which ones are actually the Calibra or which ones are just duds. And when they do that, then Russia has their radiation targeting missiles that they then fire. And then with the basically the anti-air radar system, those are even in less supply than the anti-air rockets. So they don't want to turn on their radar because it risks losing it. Additionally, the radar systems are going to run off electricity. If electricity in the region is down and the radar doesn't have independent power supply, or it's not integrated, or there's issues with communication, it severely hampers the effectiveness of any anti-air missile system, any sort of integrated air defense. Basically, like there's short of another country like the United States directly intervening and putting boots on the ground. Even the only way to like Ukraine to win the war is if there's a world war and it is destroyed in the process. Nobody wants that.
Oh, I don't want
Or
that.
I suppose some people don't care. But it is a tragedy and horrific that all of this is happening. And it doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to. It didn't have to. The West didn't have to be fucking around. Ross, we've had you here for hour 15. I don't want to keep you too long. I'm enjoying the chat, and I can keep this going if you like, for as long as you like.
Hit me up with some questions.
How about that? How about I take a short break? I need to use the restroom. Beverage time. You can riff with chat. Go ahead and riff with chat, and I'll be back in a few.
Okay.
All right.
So with the electricity grid, so much is dependent on that ensuring that that's down, or at least that it has reduced capacity, that it has sort of forced Ukraine to direct assets towards the repair and maintenance of those systems. If Ukraine doesn't come to the negotiating table, there will be a Russian offensive that will, in effect, be a coup de grace, because Ukraine's capacity to continue to conduct a war is going to be so diminished that it won't be any cohesive force. Russia can hold the Dnieper. They seem to have Zaporizhia fairly well in hand.
Mm-hmm.
And they are solidifying and gaining ground in and around Bakhmut, which is another key sort of location in the northern part of strategic importance. Ukraine's infrastructure is collapsed. Their economy is decimated. The government's barely functional. Really, the thing that's keeping them up is American and Western support, and we're doing that to bait and bleed Russia. So as much as we can continue to get Russia to expend itself in Ukraine is in America's capital interest.
And anything in the interest of American capital is not in the interest of the working class.
Hell no.
That's called dialectical materialism.
Yeah, that's what you call that.
What do you think about winter? What else does winter mean? We've touched on that a little bit. Winter's coming. What does that mean for the war? What should we know?
Winter is absolutely a complicating factor. When people were afraid that Kherson was heavily trapped and was going to be mined and all of that, I think that they were misunderstanding the sort of implications of Ukraine retaking Kherson and then having to deal with the civilian population there in the conditions of a city under siege. That drain on the warfighting effort by having to manage that civilian population, winter complicates that. Also, as far as warfighting is concerned, if you're in trenches that are flooded and wet and you're cold, you're going to see increased casualties as a result of pneumonia, foot rot, or trench foot, soldiers freezing to death, especially if they don't have, sufficient shelter. If they're huddled together in a hole, foxhole, they could still freeze to death.
You think about like Russian soldiers, rolling into town with their fucking tanks. Like, where do they go? Where do they go at night? Where do they sleep at night? Right? These are questions they got to figure out. Obviously, same with Ukrainian soldiers. This is like they've got to go somewhere.
If you're, trench warfare, if it's battle lines, you can't. There's no coming off the line, so you sleep in your foxhole, where you are able to dig out shelters and have bunkers so that you have something to, get out of the open air, but then you risk it flooding if it rains. So, like, okay, well, now you're sleeping in a wet hole.
And you don't want to be wet.
The conditions are bad. It's fighting conditions that Europe hasn't seen for 100 years. And Russia does have the logistics infrastructure to build in supports for its troops in a way that Ukraine doesn't for a longer conflict. Russia can build a type of, demilitarized zone if it wants.
Is it going to do that? Is that what's coming up next? Or is that what they're doing now? Are they carving themselves out a demilitarized zone, or like what's left to be achieved? Like what are Russia's goals? What is it trying to do from this point forward? What does it want to achieve?
It seems to me that it wants a buffer between itself and NATO. A big part of its concern was NATO's signaling of wanting to expand into Ukraine, despite us saying that it wasn't going to happen, and Zelensky himself acknowledging that he knew it wasn't going to happen. I suspect that Russia, with the territories that have been liberated or captured, will have its buffer space. I think that the Ukrainian casualty number, I have seen the 100,000 dead number. While I don't know the accuracy of that, there's been some back and forth about whether it was speculation or whether it was her being hyperbolic or whether it was based on actual figures. Hard to say. We do know that, information is at a premium in war. So if I were the Ukrainians, I would protect that number and not share it, especially if it looks bad. The entirety of the Ukrainian military armed forces was about 1 million. And
only 1% are Nazis. Only 1% are Nazis.
And only 1%.
That's a lot of Nazis.
It's still a lot of Nazis. So 100,000 dead. If you take sort of the traditional ratio of dead to wounded of 1 to 4, so you have 4 wounded for every 1 dead.
Yeah,
we're talking 500,000 people.
Oh.
Now that doesn't mean that the Ukrainian military is down 500,000 people, because people can get wounded and then patched up and sent back to the line. And not every necessarily, not like every wound is necessarily debilitating in that sense. So.
Yeah, there it is. There's the math. 1 million. That's their armed forces plus their backup or whatever they call them.
Yeah, reserves. Regional defense cops.
We have to assume they've all been called up. a million, and if we're to believe 100,000 is accurate, and if we follow the math, that's 100,000 dead plus 400,000 injured. That's half their fucking military. That's dead or maimed.
Right. So, I mean, basically, like, if you're a Ukrainian in the military, you probably know somebody who's been dead or injured.
Oh, my God. That's just massively sad. Oh,
Yeah.
it's so disgusting.
War's pretty screwed up.
But, like,
So, again, like,
yeah.
that it's half their military. Just because somebody's injured or wounded doesn't necessarily mean that they're out of the war.
Right.
I dislocated my shoulder on the flight line doing something part of my job, and it put me out of commission for a couple days. Not necessarily like wounded, but that could be considered a casualty because of, like, you're not actively in the fight because of being hurt. So it's hard to say how they're counting, or, you know, we don't know the nature of the wounds, and we're speculating on the ratio of dead to wounded.
Where did that number come from? Yeah.
That 100,000 came from Ursula, somebody who was the PM or member of a parliament or something. I wish I had a link on it, but basically she was speaking at a podium. She mentioned 100,000 officers killed, which I'd have to assume she just means like military rather than officer corps, like officers.
Yeah.
Because that's
soldiers. Yeah, all those.
Right.
There aren't that many officers. We know that.
Like, okay, if that's officers, then how many enlisted died?
Yeah.
So we don't know. But what we do know is that they, like, edited it out, the 100,000 statement later.
What?
In other versions of the video.
That's what that was about. We watched that last week. I didn't even understand. Like, I was like watching it. I was like, what did they edit out? Now I get it. The 100,000.
Yep.
They don't want to give that away. Okay, I get it now. I just had a huge light bulb go off. Thank you.
Yep. So, yeah, you don't want to say the casualty numbers if they're bad.
We do know 14,000 died in Donbass over the last 8 years before the, Russian invasion.
Ukraine could be counting basically like people that they can't account for or like haven't been able to reclaim the remains of as lost in combat.
I want to think about, the West's goal of weakening Ukraine. I'm sorry. Sorry, I meant to say weakening Russia. They're happy to weaken Ukraine as long as they make money off it. But here's what I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm.
Russia doing the invasion right now. A lot of Russian soldiers are dying. They're using and losing a lot of their weapons and vehicles and tanks and stuff. The United States wants to weaken Russia. Is it because it needs Russia to be weaker when it's going to come to the United States, trying out some of its other, geopolitical goals, so that Russia will not be able to come to, other countries' defense or even their own defense? Like, what is Russia less able to defend itself and arm their allies after this special military operation?
Yes. I mean, absolutely. The point of the bait and bleed is to get Russia to expend itself and its resources, to, weaken its own economy so that it can't invest in its own infrastructure, so that it can't do projects with other nations, so that its sort of prestige on the world stage as a major world power is diminished. If it's viewed, globally as violent and aggressive, people are less likely to do business with it, especially if the option is you either do business with the United States and its allies or Russia.
I go with Russia. I'm sorry, you weren't asking. I get it. Sorry.
But the flip side of, like, if you go with Russia is you might get cooed.
Ooh, so that's the thing. Russia is now less able to defend those countries if they would want to do that. So my question now is that like in the imperial hegemony calculus, and they're looking forward to other places where Russia might be able to they might be willing to help whatever these countries, these projects defend themselves, but now they're not in the position to do so.
Correct.
So I'm trying to think ahead, like where could this happen?
Well, Africa.
I've heard of
is going to be, I think, the next territory or continent where you'll see sort of the more explicit tension between world powers, coming to Africa to again colonize and exploit it, but in a more kind of organized and comprehensive neoliberal way. Russia had been in a position to some extent to offer support to countries on that continent. But if they are in the midst of fighting a war, they're not in a position to help their allies in Africa, or Armenia, for instance, or Iran, if it's or Iran. Wait,
I think we say Iran.
Yeah.
It's fine. I don't care.
Yeah, it absolutely reduces their ability to do things on a global stage if their resources are tied up in either like shoring up a border or fighting, a war in another country.
Man, Iran, there's some shit going on right now. You could tell because people are so adamant about saying this is organic. They're like so adamant about saying it's an organic movement. 100% organic.
It's like dudes who have to keep reminding everyone that they're alphas. It's organic, man. It's organic revolution. Okay, I swear to God, this is organic. All right. Yeah, there's signs in English, and people have American flags, and some of the people that are arrested have direct ties to NED funding. But whatever, it's organic.
Yeah.
This time it's organic, not like all the other times where it wasn't organic, but this time it is.
So if it was organic, they wouldn't have to use NED spokesman, Yeah.
Here. How come there aren't like people on the ground who are part of the movement? Where are they? How come it's like these people that are always associated with these right-wing think tanks who end up becoming the spokespeople for these movements, these organic movements? It's weird.
And again, not to say there aren't organic elements, but
sure.
To speak for myself, I believe they've been co-opted. Okay. However, if they have banned that morality police, fucking awesome. Good for them. However,
yeah,
that's not the West's goals in this whole thing. They want regime change. Let's not act naive.
Yeah, the United States does not care about the human rights of anyone, much less Iranians.
Yeah, the United States is famous for caring about Muslim women, Iranian women, etc. Come on, get out of here.
Yeah. Let's not delude ourselves, into buying the lies of empire. We're adults here. Ultimately, I think that conflict is winding down. I think the momentum is as such that it has a fairly clear resolution. That resolution being a negotiated settlement with Russia probably retaining the majority of the territory that it has. I think barring that, a Russian invasion in the winter or spring will, without outside intervention, bring the end to that conflict in a comprehensive way. Effectively, there isn't anything that the United States or the West can do about it unless they want to get involved in the war explicitly in a way that makes them a co-belligerent, which is World War III, which the whole point of having a proxy war is to not have to do the dying yourself,
Yeah.
So we don't want that.
All right.
So if you're the praying type, pray for peace. If you're the hoping type, hope for cool heads to prevail, and for the people who make those decisions to choose to serve the people that elected them, as opposed to the ones who fund them.
And I guess we'll leave it at that. Ross, thank you for being with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to come on, talk, say hi. Hopefully, I say things that are helpful and clear.
I think so.
Okay.
Awesome.
I don't always know, because I just talk.
No, that was great. I had a great time. I had a blast.
And then I'm like, oh, what did I just say? What happened?
Yeah.
Where am I? What
thank you again.
Oh.
Ross, we'll talk to you again soon, but thank you so much for talking with me today and sharing and helping us wrap our heads around what is happening in Ukraine. I think this is valuable for me, and I think this is a good talk. Okay.
Great. I appreciate it. I'll come back on some other time. I'd love to. I insist. You don't have a choice. Maybe Sunday. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
We'll talk later. But
we can get you back in.
And I'll talk to you later.
All right, Ross. Thanks again. We'll talk to you again soon. That's the chat, everyone. I hope you liked it.